Now in spatial realities, date for MetaConnect officially announced. The Metaverse Standards Forum celebrates first anniversary, while a new alliance for OpenUSD is announced. Also, the fourth structured dialogue on immersive technologies took place. In the interview, Patrick Grady about the EU communication on virtual worlds.
Today, we're going to talk about the metaverse.
The next evolution of the internet, called the metaverse, will be extended with 3D.
And we call this the metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse.
Introducing Apple Vision Pro.
The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse. The metaverse.
Hi and welcome to the 44th episode of Spatial Realities. My name is Thomas Riedel and I'm happy you tuned in. I'm also happy to finally be able to push the first episode in English. We have been in German for almost 2 years now and it was a great experience. But as I have widened the focus of this podcast with renaming it from Metaverse Podcast to Spatial Realities, I felt it is a good idea to widen the possible interview candidates by throwing out episodes in English from time to time. This is why from now on we have an additional feed containing only the English episodes. The main feed will still contain all the episodes published for this podcast, no matter what language. And there's even a third feed now available with only German episodes, if you don't even want to see anything in English. I hope you celebrate this as much as I do, and to kick the first English episode off, I'm happy that I've been able to talk to Patrick Grady from Metaverse EU. He published an excellent article explaining in a very clear way what the European Commission just announced. In the communication called Publication, the EU outlines a strategy about how to take leadership in the development of virtual worlds and what we would have called Metaverse in 2022. But the communication uses the expression Web 4.0, which caused some irritation expressed by industry professionals. And to talk about the communication in detail, you will hear the recording of my interview with Patrick later in this episode. But before we get to the interview, here are the most important news of the week. MetaConnect 2023 officially announced. As Meta just announced a talk for SIGGRAPH where they will talk about 2 prototypes utilizing retinal resolution and light field cameras, it confirmed the date for its yearly developer conference Connect. At September 27 and 28, expect an event we know from the last years. On day 1, Mark Zuckerberg will announce the new products. For example, the awaited successor of the most sold headset worldwide Quest 2, the Meta Quest 3. Following up, there will be the Developer State of the Union, which was usually held by John Carmack. Carmack left Meta by the end of 2022, which means that we might hear Meta's CTO Andrew Bosworth. On day 2, there will be developer sessions and product sneak peeks. In the last 2 years, especially the keynote with Mark Zuckerberg was an important event in the tech industry calendar, as in 2021 that one started the metaverse hype, and the second one clearly showed serious commitment in XR technology and B2B commitment. Of course, you will get the full analysis of Connect here at Spatial Realities. Have you heard about the fourth structured dialogue in immersive technologies by the German Federal Ministry of Digital Affairs and Transport? There have been very little news, and only the German news agency dpa wrote about it briefly. And in my LinkedIn timeline there was only one post where a professor complained that he hasn't been invited yet. But as the article of the website of the ministry proclaims, there have been around 100 interested parties from politics, business, research and society. So far, I've been able to talk to a couple of participants which generally agree that the meetings were professionally done, the topics were interesting and the networking good. After the last one, the fourth dialogue, the Minister for Digital Affairs outed that the intention to make Germany the best location for new technologies. Only 2 weeks later, the federal government announced harsh cuttings in digitization of the administration from €377 million to merely €3.1 million. That contradiction makes me wonder how that fits together. Also, after 4 meetings, we should expect some action from the ministry, else we could assume that those meetings were only good to advertise the liberal policy of Minister Volker Wissing, for example, loosen regulation, and not to actually do good to the industry. I will keep my eyes on what the ministry will do in the future. And finally, standards have been important for the development of the internet. And this is what we assume with the development of the Metaverse, or as the EU would say, Web 4.0. This is why we all got very excited when exactly 1 year ago the Metaverse Standards Forum has been founded. In the meanwhile, the MSF has over 2,200 members and organized a whole lot of working groups for the topics of developing standards, interoperability, avatars, security and privacy, and much, much more. One fact important to know is that Apple didn't join the forum. On August the 1st of this year, Apple, Pixar, Adobe, Autodesk and Nvidia announced the formation of the Alliance for OpenUSD to, as they say, drive open standards for 3D content. Noticeably, they say 3D content, and not once Metaverse or even Web 4.0. This is in contrast to Meta's and Epic's goals to take part in the development of the Metaverse. To manage the Alliance for OpenUSD, the Linux Foundation's JDF was chosen to house the project. Also, IKEA just announced to join the Alliance. As it just started, I will keep you informed about the activities of the Alliance. In the meanwhile, you might check out the website and events where more information about what exactly the Alliance will do might be communicated. By the way, you can find all the links to the news in the show notes, and if you want to talk about spatial computing, Metaverse or the future of the internet in 3D, you're welcome to join our Discord server, where new interesting people sign up almost every day. And now we will have the opportunity to talk about a document published by the European Commission with the title An EU Initiative on Web 4.0 and Virtual Worlds, a head start in the next technological transition. And because EU stuff is usually a bit dry and complicated, it's good that I found an excellent article by Patrick Grady explaining what is actually going on and why it matters to the XR industry. So to walk us through the document, I'm very happy that Patrick is with us now. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for having me.
Great to have you on the show, Patrick. So to kick things off, I would love to know what your first thoughts were on the communication. Were you surprised, or was that something one could expect?
Well, my very first thought was, why are we talking about Web 4.0? What does this actually mean? What do the people who wrote this document think that means? But when I read through, there was some criticism about this document that it was a bit of fluff, a lot of sort of vague commitments. But for me, it's just quite exciting. It's a starting gun really for a lot of future future initiatives on virtual worlds and the metaverse. So I was reading it with excitement, and I have to say it was long overdue, this document, and very glad to see it finally arrive.
We will talk about that expression Web 4.0 soon. It's really a little bit confusing what they actually mean with that. But hey, for that, they actually erased the word metaverse from the communication.
Yeah, we actually saw an earlier version of it before it published, and in the main text there was like 1 or 2 mentions of the metaverse left in, and now, as you point out, there's no mention at all in the main text. The only time you see it, kind of ironically, is in the footnotes when it's referencing previous EU research. So it got a proper whack job, and we don't see it now in the text.
Yeah, very interesting. Talking about that later in the podcast. But before we dive deeper into the communication, please give us a bit of an insight on what your daily job actually is and why you are interested so much in the work of the EU policymakers.
Yeah, so, well, in short, I'm a specialist in metaverse policy. Now, sometimes it's easy to take for granted when you work here in Brussels that this isn't always clear what this means. But if you think about product policy, this is where companies are trying to design and how they tailor and sell products. Well, here in Brussels, in the capital of the EU, policy means how do we design and shape laws and governance, even softer initiatives. So I really come from the think tank world, where I spent time researching what policy should look like in tech, in most emerging tech issues, but especially in the last year in AI. And as you might be aware, that proved to be a very useful intellectual investment, I would say, in the last year or so. But then I became very interested in this emerging area of metaverse policy. I saw over a year ago now that the EU had intentions to look at this space, and really there wasn't any organization or really individual in Brussels that was focusing just on the niche issues of metaverse policy. So I decided to become that person. So I set up Metaverse EU, which we could talk about, which is basically like a policy hub I use to advise companies. And I also lead a tech practice here in Brussels, again, advising on emerging tech issues.
So what kind of role do you have in Brussels? Do you lobby for economy, or what is your drive? Why do you do that?
Yeah, it's an important question. And really, when I set up Metaverse EU, it was purely because I was fascinated in the topic and it wasn't being covered. And I just saw that as an opportunity. I previously had done a lot of work for think tanks on how do you design a platform ethically, like a likes of Twitch or Tinder or PlayStation. How do these companies design their platforms in a way that can protect the digital rights of users? So that's really the space I come from. And then for me, the metaverse just exacerbates many of these issues, but also can really improve the lives of people too. So the reason I set up this resource was just because I saw it didn't exist, to be honest. But now I think we have ambitions to make it a bit of a more kind of central resource that can be used by policymakers and companies alike. And then for the consultancy, it's about communicating, similar to maybe how we're doing it today, communicating what's actually going on in the bubble, trying to make sense of EU policymaking.
And what kind of business model do you have?
At the moment, the Metaverse EU it's just an initiative that I started it. Like it was just a newsletter or website. That said, I mean, that's how it started off, but we're becoming a bit more formal, let's say. And I now have somebody else, my colleague and friend, John Luigi Vona, who came on board, and we've started becoming a bit more formalized. We do events, we've set up LinkedIn pages, and I think eventually the dream is to have a non-profit that will potentially have members or some sort of some business model. But at the moment, it's just a couple of guys who are putting something together for hopefully the greater good.
And have you done something with the topic of metaverse or XR before, or is it a new thing for you too?
Yeah, I would say XR is probably quite new. But again, on the content side, I was already working in this kind of space. There were lots of platforms that we wouldn't have called a metaverse, but now are being called a metaverse that that we were doing relevant things for, especially regarding trust and safety. But the whole world of, how do you design immersive headsets to be inclusive, to be safe and privacy defensive, then this is kind of new to me. So it's quite very exciting.
So you have been in Brussels for a while. How long?
I've only been in Brussels for just over a year, actually.
Oh, okay.
So when I was working for the think tanks, I was actually living mostly in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. And then I worked briefly, I went to Hungary for a year because, just to give you a bit of background to the EU, the way it's set up is, yes, the capital is in Brussels, but they have kind of, I don't know what the equivalent would be in Germany, maybe ministries. So they have like ministries in different countries. So the Ministry of, I don't know, Culture will be somewhere. The Ministry of Finance, the ECB, I mean, it'd be another place. The Institute for Innovation and Technology is in Budapest. So I worked for that institution for a while too, which gives a bit more background to this. Especially, I mean, talking about the metaverse, one of the key challenges for the EU is really how do you, well, from the EU's perspective, how do we make sure that EU companies are leading the way here? And so having that background in innovation and tech is super interesting.
Yeah. If you would compare what the EU is doing concerning the metaverse and XR and virtual worlds and Internet
Web
4.0 and whatever
yeah.
they mean with that, to other topics, tech topics, can you compare it? Are there differences?
No, it's there are definitely differences. Let me give you some examples, because this, for me, is why it's so exciting working in Brussels, because the template is that Brussels will make a law. It will be the first one to make this really bold tech law. And then the rest of the world, by default, because of how lucrative the market here is, will follow that law, even though they're not subject to it. We see this especially from American companies. So this is called the so-called Brussels effect. So we saw this with GDPR, for example. I think we've already started to see it with a new law coming through called the Digital Services Act, which is basically like a platform governance regulation. The AI Act is going through right now and is causing ripples all throughout the world. It will pass by the end of this year, and I think it will have a similar effect. So in answer to your question, I think eventually, not now because the communication is very light touch, but eventually EU regulations on the metaverse could have a worldwide impact.
So that means actually what the EU is doing has consequences worldwide. And I was repeating that all of the time, but it's like the US and other countries are actually copying what the EU is doing because it's good. It's actually good.
Yeah, it's good. It inspires other laws, like the Californian Privacy Bill, for example, is very much a copy and paste from GDPR. And yeah, as you say, I mean, for companies, it's not even, it's just simpler, really, in some ways. Rather than having two different businesses operating in different jurisdictions, you just align with the EU laws, and it makes their life simpler. And I guess they have the guarantee that these issues have been, thought long and hard about in the EU, and this was the conclusion. So they follow it. Why not?
So the EU is leading, right?
It is leading. I think on this topic, so on the topics we've discussed on AI and obviously privacy, absolutely. On this topic, yeah, I don't know. I think we have to flag some of the other regions in the world that are doing lots of governance on this. So I think Dubai is a big one, South Korea, Japan, even Finland, I think will have a kind of quite forward-looking metaverse strategy coming out in September. So I don't think the EU was first to this one, but the difference with the EU is once the machine gets moving, it doesn't really stop. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, you can change the direction a little bit, but it really doesn't stop. So that's why I was interested in this topic. A year ago when I first heard the Commission start talking about it, because I knew that eventually this is going to become extremely relevant to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So one question we also need to answer before we get to the contents of the communication is to learn what a communication actually is, because this is an expression, this is something special for the EU policy. Can you explain a bit what it is and what role it plays in the EU?
Yeah. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it. It's the EU doesn't really make our lives easier than than they can do. It's best thought of, firstly, let's say what it's not. It's not a regulation. It's not a hard promise. It's not a law that will become, the law of the whole of the EU. It's best thought of as an initial position. So, you could think of it as an initial strategy position. It's just a paper that lays out how they understand the issue. It sets the agenda, and it creates, obviously, a lot of initial discourse, which is super valuable. That's what a communication is. So, yeah, it's not a regulation. It's not a directive. All of these sort of uses of hard law. And, yeah, we can talk about what it says too.
Yeah, and one should understand it as part of a process.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, you're never going to just get a regulation proposed out of nowhere. There's a lot of fact finding in the EU. Even for the communication, there was wide consultations with industry, with the public. There was a citizens panel just on this topic before the communication came out. So it's just a cog in the machine, really. It's always the first one. There'll be the usual if we take the AI Act, for example, there was a communication in 2018, there was two in 2019, then there's a white paper, and then finally the AI Act is proposed in 2021, and now again we're set to pass this year. So if you look at that journey, then you say, well, the communications were precursors in the end to what became quite a serious regulation. I'm not saying that's going to happen with virtual worlds, and hopefully not with Web 4.0, but these are precursors to some more serious pieces of regulation.
Is it possible that there's a communication but no law coming out of it?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely possible, or it's possible that the recommendations do not have to be laws. They could be, in the case of the EU, it's funding, it's partnerships, it's governance. Maybe there's another we have a lot of different kinds of initiatives. I think there's 40 different kind of documents that we could see from the EU, but it could be something a bit more light touch. Yeah.
So you already mentioned it a little bit. This communication is part of a process, and it was not the only thing happening in the topics of metaverse and virtual worlds. What else was there before?
Yeah, so I mentioned the public consultation. This is kind of very usual. So they'll have a few weeks window where they open up to the public to submit. It's quite funny when you see because most of the time you're expecting big companies to submit to this, but occasionally you get some individuals from all over the union, which is quite entertaining to read sometimes. But that's part of the usual process, and we see that a lot in the EU. What is truly unique that we saw is from, I think it was March to April, as part of this kind of new experiment in participatory democracy, the EU ran what's called a citizens panel. So this is also known as a citizens assembly. I think you saw this in Macron's first term. We saw this in Ireland to decide the abortion debate. Citizens panels are basically big focus groups. So you take a cross section of society. So there was 150 people from all over the EU, from different economic backgrounds, different race, gender, to try and be as representative as possible. You present a topic to them, and then you ask them what their thoughts are. So they did that with virtual worlds, and they came up with 23 recommendations. Now, although I love the idea of this exercise, it's really important what you tell citizens. It will depend a lot, on what they eventually say about a topic. And the metaverse is so complicated that some of the criticism of the recommendations are that they just don't really grasp anything particularly new or interesting.
Mm-hmm. It was just like talking about the internet.
This is the best way to describe it. I think what happens if you don't properly educate the citizens, they just fall back on things they know about, which is the internet. So it's actually the hardest thing in most conversations about the metaverse to try and decide what's actually niche about it. Why is this an issue that is not happening on the internet, for example?
Yeah, it's something we're talking about, which is in the future. And it's really hard to predict the future or, tell what the future is. It's more important to say what we actually want. But I guess this is also some kind of the process. What we see with those attempts is that it's some kind of mirror of what people think should be or how they understand the present, right?
Exactly what you say. And it's also the case that we did see some really great points that were made by citizens. It was fascinating. And there's something really powerful when you hear a citizen say it than if you hear just any old politician making the point. So, you hear citizens saying things that, again, not super specific to the metaverse, but talking about accessibility and talking about, well, I actually can't even access the internet. So why are we even having this conversation? Or talking about how it's difficult for older people to use some new internet products. And these kind of are relevant issues to the metaverse, even if they don't quite pinpoint what's new.
Anything else what happened before the actual communication got communicated? I remember the Ursula von der Leyen talking about virtual worlds such as a metaverse. Do you remember anything about that?
So this is the 2022 State of the EU Union, where they lay out the work program for the next year. And so that's where we first heard about it. That's where my ears went ringing. That was the intention to do this initiative. That is essentially the promise that was made and completed. The other kind of interesting element here, and you're really asking for some nerdy EU politics, but let's go for it, is the Commission is the executive function of the EU. There's no perfect comparison, I think, in the German or UK system, but it's almost like having a president, the presidential function of a democracy. The Parliament is another conversation. And so what we've seen is that although the Commission have started communicating their thoughts on the subject, the European Parliament also have 2 reports coming out, which will basically be a response. Either they're going to agree, they're going to tackle the same sort of topics, or they're going to say, why are we using the word Web 4.0, for example? And in these reports, I'm quite interested. My feeling is that these are a bit more concrete. We're focusing on topics like intellectual property, data protection, and I'm quite looking forward to these. These will be coming up in the next couple of months.
So let's dive into the communication itself. In your text, you, of course, stumbled first about the words which define the text itself, virtual worlds and Web 4.0. Let's start with the virtual worlds. What does the EU actually mean with that?
I think when this process started, virtual worlds was meant to be, the kind of Second Life platform, maybe even Sims, but the difference, I guess, with something like Sims is that in a virtual world, you have an avatar and it's a persistent world. And this is kind of the understanding from also the gaming community of virtual worlds. The problem that the EU had is that the metaverse, or this topic, became much larger than that. It became about digital twins of factories. It became about augmented reality products, and it became also about, just smart cities and things like this. And virtual worlds doesn't really cover that, but you've seen in the communication, they've tried to kind of expand the definition from a platform to the blending of the real and virtual. I would say physical and virtual, but I think they say real and virtual.
Yeah, it's the attempt to make everybody happy a little bit.
It's the attempt. Well, that's a very positive way of spinning it. You could also say it's an attempt to do something a bit different with the word. I kind of hesitate. I think when you have such vague concepts, including the metaverse, it's much easier to converge than to sort of create new ideas. I think virtual worlds is an element of the metaverse, and at the moment it's kind of being used interchangeably with it.
I was a little bit confused. I'm always a little bit confused when a regulator uses words and explains how they understand it, as if they are the ones who should define it. Is that actually a role of a regulator to define such words? So when they talk about virtual...
Yeah, sorry. In their defense, it is quite important because it defines the scope of regulation. So, for example, in the AI conversation in the last year, the definition is the most important thing, because depending how you define AI, it's an Excel spreadsheet or it's the latest GPT-4. So, a huge scope. And although you might wonder, well, regulators, if they're doing their job properly, are not sitting there in a room and just thinking about definitions. They are consulting widely and sort of coming to, and in some cases, including on AI, even the industry themselves didn't have a good answer. So it's just part of the process. So yeah, just to defend them a little bit.
That's why we need you in this interview, because you can explain why they actually do it. And that's a good thing. Next up, the term Web 4.0. So let's talk about that one. It seems we are past Web 3.
3.0. Where do we start with this one, Thomas? I just took a massive gulp of coffee before this one. No, I think this was a surprise, I think, to see Web 4.0. As you say, even the folks from the Web 3 worlds are wondering, what did they miss if we're already past Web 3? I think there's been a bit of conflation to create this word. I think there are kind of established concepts of Industry 4.0 or sort of fourth industrial revolution. You hear these sort of terms knocking around. And so the Commission, wanting to do something a bit different and wanting to be seen set their own path, have decided to use this word Web 4.0. And the definition in the text is actually very similar to how many people define the metaverse. I think if you swap out those words, people in the metaverse space would say that's not a bad definition. It's all about interconnected virtual worlds, and again, the blending of the real and the virtual, and enabled by IoT, blockchain, AI, etc. So I don't really have a big issue with the concept, but yeah, the fact they're using this new term is really confusing. One of the good things about the communication was this indication that they wanted to work with international standards and international bodies. Well, if you look at the 10 standards development organizations, or even organizations like the World Economic Forum, they're all using this word metaverse, and they're trying their best to align with each other. And then you have governments too, from Dubai to Japan to South Korea to Finland, as I said earlier, who are using this word metaverse. And yeah, it's a bit confusing, but we're at least starting to align on what that could mean. and then you have the EU come out with Web 4.0, and it's, for me, it's a big shooting themselves in the foot a little bit. And I'm personally hoping that when Parliament comes up with this response, that's the opportunity to say, no, we don't need to continue with this.
What I was thinking when I heard that expression was like, okay, Margaret Vestager maybe said, guys, this is an expression which Mark Zuckerberg coined and made an hype out of it. We shouldn't use what Mark Zuckerberg gave us. We should have our own word. And Vestager and Mark Zuckerberg are big friends, as we know. So I was like, okay, as a word describing the next evolution, the next step of the development of the internet, it's actually not that bad. It's not so loaded with crap like Web3. There's a lot of criticism about Web3. It actually is fresh. And I'm getting warm as we talk with that expression, to be honest.
Well, I think it's let me take some of those points. I think you're exactly right. I was maybe being a bit too positive before, because cynically, and this is definitely my own opinion, of course, it's a surprise to nobody that they didn't want to use sort of this dreaded M word. They didn't want to use and I think before I really got into this space, you could see that, why would a massive regulator be seen to be endorsing a concept driven by one company? And especially given the political context, it would be absurd. But then I think going into this space, you learn about, the likes of Matthew Ball, who did a lot to define the metaverse. That was happening years before the name change. You learn that people like Tim Sweeney of Epic Games are talking about the metaverse way before. And obviously the term itself came from Snow Crash in 1992. So yeah. I think that there is actually a bit of intellectual thought. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg was just actually a bit early to that. But yeah, it is what I should obviously announce my conflict of interest. I've just set up a domain with Metaverse, so I'm very keen for it to stay around. But I think it's also a bit like crypto, really, maybe in some way. We had this huge hype and a lot of nonsense happening, but there's kind of a more sensible conversation happening now, also with crypto regulation in the EU. And my feeling is that we're entering a more sensible conversation with the metaverse, and it's less associated with one company. And it's actually, there's a lot of German players, but also European industrial players who are now calling this industrial metaverse. And I think that can be something that the EU might be more willing to get on board with.
Yeah, like Siemens, for example, announcing investing 1 billion into Industry 4.0 or Metaverse.
Yeah.
So
and you have likes of Nokia too, and even some European brands like IKEA must be one of the largest augmented reality companies now. So yeah, I think there are a lot of positive stories we can tell in the EU, and just hopefully using the right words.
Do we need to say something else about Internet 4.0?
I'd quite like to, but I don't know where to take it, really. It's fascinating because I was quite interested by the word, and I was very keen to look up where it came from. It's actually quite difficult to find. I don't know if you've got your journalist hat on, if you had any more success. Well, actually, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, but I'll just say when I tried to look up a definition, I couldn't find any, really. And when I tried to look up a definition of the metaverse, you have, papers that are that are doing meta-analysis on, 160 or something. So please tell me what you think of Web 4 actually. And do you think there's a difference? From my understanding, there's actually a difference technically between Web 3 and Web 3.0. So is there a difference between Web 4 and Web 4.0? How do you see it?
Yeah, there's a lot of topics you're asking here. I see a big difference between Web 3 and Web 3.0. But also that there was never a working web with it. So it was some kind of trial. It's like when you develop a digital product, sometimes you have the number 3 of a product, and then you find out after having it on the market 5 minutes that it's actually crap. And then you fast develop a new version, and then it's 4.0 and try to work with that. And I fear this about Web 3, Web 3.0. It's good that it's gone. Let's say like that. It was a too long discussion about what this actually should be, especially with all the crypto stuff going around. There was never a very clear definition. There was never a clear product where we could say, yes, this is definitely Web 3 or Web 3.0. We should do it. We should call it like that. It was a very muddy and not so fine discussion about that, to be honest. And so I'm very happy that this is actually gone. That's my personal opinion about that.
Yeah, and I mean, in the there's a like a working document, kind of like a massive annex that came with this communication, and in that they have all the definitions. If you're interested, metaverse is apparently interconnected virtual worlds, which again I think kind of makes sense. But Web3, is apparently this decentralized tokenized economy, and you see in brackets 2010s. And what 10 years ago we were living in a tokenized economy. I must have missed something, but I think we actually had some idea of what Web3 is, and so I'm very confused about what Web4 might mean.
Yeah, I think this is also a lot of marketing and influencing and future narrative stuff going on. We really struggle with the development of a new internet because, first of all, it's very big. A lot of things are happening at the same time, as it was very easy when we shifted from Web 1 to Web 2, Web 1.0 to 2.0, because there was a clear shift and something really big happened and everybody was going that way, or a lot of people were going, a lot of the industry was going in that way. And it was just easy to say, okay, now we have the Web 2.0. Nowadays, it's really hard to say where it's going because there are so many different directions everything is going. The web is not just something like we're going from the blog or from a forum software to social media or something like that. The shifts are much bigger. There's a lot of more happening. So it is actually hard.
And in your view, the shift from Web 1 to Web 2 is the user-generated content mainly?
For example, yeah, and then social media, of course, like this is the one you could easily say, okay, there's something happened there. And what we also discovered is that something, for example, influencers or advisors discovered, okay, we can be a Web 2.0 advisor and influencer. And this by itself got its own industry and its own branch of web consulting. And so every time a new technology comes, there's a whole wave of people claiming that this is the future. And this is actually, that makes it much harder to say something like, okay, now we are at web number .0 something, because there are so many different opinions and stuff going on and everybody wants to have their stake in it and wants to predict the future. And I am right because I predicted it and stuff like that. This is all the bullshit which really don't help us saying what is actually going on. And this is why I usually go and try to ignore that stuff and say, if we want to find out what actually is or was, we need to look back. So I do it in a way more scientific way. I don't try to say what is actually right now happening, but more understand what happened in the past and then try to say, okay, look, this was Web 3. And the same with Web 4. I would say it's a fine expression because it's pretty neutral to discuss what we would love to have in the future, what kind of web, but to actually judge what it was, we need to look back in 5 years. So it makes no sense to say we have the Web 4 right now or something like that. But it's more about, I always love the question, what do we want to have in the future? And this is actually what it is about, right? So who will earn money in the future? Which technologies do we want to have? And of course, as a regulator, we have also the questions like, okay, we have a democracy here. So what do we need to have a solid democracy in the future? And this is where it gets interesting, because then the industry comes and says, no, we can't have that because those regulations, because then we can't make any money, which is, of course, bullshit most of the times. But these are the forces pulling on the regulations, of course, you know that better than me, what is going on there in Brussels. These are the things happening there.
And you touched on it a little bit there, but what's often missing from these kind of definitions is what's the value? Like, how is it actually making people's lives better? Not to be too elaborate, but it has to have some purpose, I think. It has to be, otherwise we are just shooting at different words at the end of the day.
Yes. And this is why I'm getting warm with the expression Web 4.0, because it gives us some kind of definition. It looks a little bit into the future.
With Web 4.0, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So no idea if we will call it Web 4.0 in when we look back at today and say, okay, this was a good idea. But it's a neutral ground. We can maybe think again about what we actually want to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's neutral. I think I take that on completely. The problem is then, do you undo some of the work that's already been happening? These standards organizations, for example, do we now have to start writing entire new papers about Web 4.0? Which, yeah, fine. It's
It's a problem. I had the problem with my podcast. It was called Metaverse Podcast for 18 months. And I was feeling that something is going on. Like, I need to change something. So I changed the podcast to spatial realities because I found that very interesting. It has something of worlds. It's also some technical components like, of course, spatial computing, which was just introduced. It wasn't introduced, but used by Apple, and everybody's talking about spatial computing now. So there's a lot of words going around, and at the end, we might also only call it web or net or something like that.
Yeah, and there's always the joke that we used to call it cyberspace. So this could just be the next iteration of that, and we'll stop when the metaverse finally arrives. We won't call it the metaverse anymore, kind of thing. And I kind of subscribe to that. I think you've made a very smart move changing your podcast. I think I've seen other people talk about they name their initiatives after the truly unique features of the metaverse. So immersive, for example. Immersive Wire, by the way, fantastic newsletter. If they're not already listening to reading, yeah. But I think you're going to start seeing coalitions who are using these sorts of words too, because they don't want obviously the risk that the metaverse will slowly fade away as a relevant concept anymore.
And we need to differentiate between what the industry is talking about and what actually the consumer is doing. So when the industry is talking about, for example, the mobile web, a lot of years ago, it was a totally new paradigm, and everybody said, okay, this is a new kind of the web, the mobile web. And everybody was trying to make their WordPress pages compatible with the first iPhone. And it was not, of course, not a new web per se. It was just a new form to access the web, and the pages had to be different a little bit in a technical way. So, but I see that's the same thing. So for the industry itself, it was important that we were talking about the mobile web to understand what this actually is, because there was a new paradigm, a new user interface coming, and everybody had to do products in a new way and understand UX and all that stuff which comes with it. So it was helpful for the industry, but it was not so helpful for the normal consumer. They didn't care at all. They just wanted to use products, have fun on the interwebs, and then discover the newly launched Instagram.
Yeah.
They were not talking about, now I'm in the mobile web. What they said was, I'm using the internet, of course. And they even said it when they used the mobile app from Facebook. They said, I'm in the internet. And which was, of course, for us old farts from the interweb, it was horrible hearing those people talk about Facebook like it would be the internet. But that's the reality of the consumer.
I mean, for some regions it was the internet. That's, I think, the mobile, because there are some parts of the world that got mobile phones before computers. That's just the next evolution. So, and they were accessing the internet through platforms. But so, in your view, what are consumers? What makes most sense for consumers now, I suppose?
That's very hard to say, because there's actually no metaverse yet, I would say. What we have is some virtual worlds, some product experiences, for example, Roblox or VR chat, which are working very well. And if you ask people there, most of them would just say, I'm using Roblox, I'm in the internet. Some of them, very few of them, playing a game, having fun, meeting friends, this is what they actually would say. They don't care about such definitions, I would say. But of course, there are a couple of people who are nerded in a deeper way, all that. They already, like VR chat, for example, there are a couple of people talking about VR chat as a metaverse. So this is very interesting to see. So not so many, I would say Roblox is a metaverse. Only the industry says Roblox could be a metaverse.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've started using the singular now for so rather than saying the metaverse is like a process, you're saying, well, we have platforms that themselves are metaverses. I find the different visions of this word quite interesting. I mean, for some people it is like having interconnected, you're jumping from different platforms, and for other people it's just this way to describe a wave of new technology, of internet technology. And it can be as simple as that. It's not really something that will just arrive when a platform arrives. It's just a very slow evolution rather than sort of a revolution. But for me, I quite like the term proto-metaverse to describe some instances of VR chats of the world, or Roblox, or if you're accessing Roblox using VR, it's because it's now going to be compatible with Quest. I mean that's going to take
Not yet.
lots.
They will launch an app soon.
Oh yes, okay. Well, I mean, for a lot of people, that's going to tick some boxes, I think. So.
Totally, yeah. Maybe some will then talk about Roblox as a metaverse more often, but then again, it's the view of the consumer, and they even think the Facebook would be the internet. So they don't. There's a difference between using a word wrong, but it's fine for them to understand what they do, versus the industry is discussing very precisely what things are. And then I also have a problem calling Roblox or VR chat the metaverse, because it is clearly not a metaverse. The possibility that we can discuss about what is the metaverse, still discuss about it, and it's not absolutely clear what the metaverse is a clear sign for me that we still don't know what the metaverse is. Maybe it's just an idea which will never become real, but helps us developing something new. So,
well, I think you said before you were speaking to a lot of people that have been in this industry for a while, and I think people who are talking about extended reality like escape most of these issues because they're talking about very concrete policy areas. But that said, I don't think just extended reality devices quite cover the issues we're talking about. They don't really cover what it looks like when you're simulating entire environments. It doesn't really cover virtual platforms, for example. It doesn't really cover new kinds of digital assets that we might also want to include in this umbrella definition. So, yeah, it is imprecise. But at the moment, I don't really mind that the metaverse is an imprecise word, because it's kind of just doing a lot of legwork at the moment and trying to carry a lot of different meanings, different meanings with it. So, I think it can be flexible, but words have to stop being flexible when you talk about regulation, as you say.
and then I'm a big fan of actually being very harsh to those definitions. So in the one hand, it opens discussions. It makes us have fantasies. And that's very good when you want to create a better future. Like you want to elaborate what possibilities one could have with the metaverse. But on the other hand, when we want to develop a product, we want to be very precise. Or if we want to have regulations, we want to be very precise, because we want to have precise regulations that actually work, that actually do something. And so I tend to say, okay, what is the minimal viable definition of a metaverse? And I never said that in English, so I will repeat it here. My approach, for example, here, I said it a lot of times in the German version of this podcast, so people who heard different episodes of the podcast will go back ironing. So what I love about the book Snow Crash is that it actually delivers a very minimal and a logic description in a metaphoric way what the metaverse could be. So what we see in the book is a single world which is actually too small to be the metaverse. So the whole world in the book is in this kind of metaverse, and it's just one simulation, which is the globe with one street. There's just one street in this world, and only next to this street are all the different experiences like cafes and offices and stuff like that. And this is, of course, a metaphor for something else. It's a symbol of the metaverse itself. It's not the metaverse, but actually a metaphor of the metaverse. So the street is the kind of connection between virtual reality experiences. And if you want to change from one experience to another, you have to walk on that street to another experience. You have to use this street. So the definition would be the very slim, minimal, but I think very clear definition of a metaverse would be the metaverse is a network of virtual reality experiences which are connected that way that you have to walk from one experience to another using this street. And that's very simple, but I think it's very clear what is meant by that. It's like an analogy to the internet. You have to use a browser, for example, to surf from one website to another. And in analogy to that, the metaverse is also a network of VR experiences which are connected with the street. Whatever technological,
Yeah.
whatever tech is meant there, we don't have that yet.
So you're not saying the street itself could be a platform, but you're saying it's just like, the metaphor for how do we transfer data from one...
Like HTML.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So what I also often say is what we don't have yet is the HTML of the metaverse. We are working on that. There are different approaches to achieve that. But right now, there's no HTML of the metaverse. Everybody is building their own experiences. It's like having a Word document and OpenOffice and LibreOffice and don't know the word for what's the one for the Apple guys?
Pages.
Pages, yes. So we have them, but they're not connected with each other. And what we try to find out is now how we can actually connect all those different documents that this is a network.
Yes, and we can talk about interoperability too, because I quite like this very difficult word to pronounce. But going back to your idea, I like it. But then, how do we assimilate this idea with something like Apple's vision for their products, where you'll say that it's mostly enterprise, you're watching, it's entertainment, but you're passing through, you're not necessarily like transversing virtual worlds.
What we actually experience right now is how the interviewee is interviewing the reporter itself. It's fine. We're going to do that for another 5 minutes, but then we have to go back to the communication.
Okay, sorry.
It's totally fine. It's fine. This is why I love a podcast. They can have their own dynamics. What we see with Apple is what they do is not developing the next stage of the internet. What they do is developing the technological platform for further development in that space. They did that with the iPhone. If we look back to the iPhone, what they did is they did not develop Instagram, but they developed the technological foundation that something like Instagram was possible. So the first iPhone was, of course, crap. Then the third one was actually very good then. And they also understood, okay, we need something like iTunes, we need something like a store. They ironed out all the problems of the APIs and stuff like that. And the thing started working and people started imitating it. Android was born and stuff like that. And then a lot of apps were invented, like the drinking beer app or the farting app.
Yeah,
or
the gun. There was like a gun sound one, I think.
Yes, the soundboard. And a lot of things happening. And then somebody got the idea of Instagram, and this one exploded. So, and then a new kind of social media started. There was, of course, Facebook having their own app, but already that felt a little bit old when Instagram came out, and everybody was like, oh my God, what is going on here? And this could only happen because something like the iOS platform was invented by Apple. And this is what we see right now. Yeah.
It's also hardware too, right? So I think Apple created the front-facing camera, which was meant for video calling. And I don't think it was used very often for video calling. What really happened is we invented the selfie. And we couldn't have really imagined this explosion or this new type of content, which then obviously you get filters of Instagram and Snapchat and also hardware.
Totally. And what we see right now with the Vision Pro headset, for example, is what they do is they invent not the next step of the internet, but they invent a software platform, a technological platform, where something like a metaverse could be invented. So what I try to communicate is that what Apple is doing is giving us a technological platform, and the development of the metaverse was never so probable. Before, we just were like having single experiences, you could, of course, download the update files from the interwebs, but they were not connected to something. But now Apple tries to have a platform where immersive experiences can actually be connected. And this will be very interesting to see what actually happens in the next 5 years, because Apple started this. This will take 5 years, probably. Maybe it's faster. Everything accelerates, so it might be that actually it's faster.
Well, it's definitely going to seem like faster.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think their glasses will be planned for less than 5 years. So not even the sort of next version of the Vision, but also the glasses. But yeah, it could be kicked down the road. It remains to be seen. But it's very exciting. You know, I don't want to dismiss all the work that's been done in the industry beforehand, but to have two sort of Goliaths fighting it out for this space is only going to be good news for consumers, I think.
Totally. And I think it was everything what happened before was necessary. So this is what follows. Some will die, some will be sold. Maybe HTC will sell again everything to Google. Who knows? Hopefully not. But it looks pretty small what HTC is doing. Very niche, very movie making XR industry stuff. Very, yeah.
Let's hope it doesn't go to waste on a Google Glass too.
Absolutely. All right. So coming back to the EU communication on virtual worlds, we need to maybe to talk about this. What in the communication got its own boxes where it says the Commission will. This is some very interesting, because you also elaborated about that in your text. So can you tell a little bit what is meant with that?
Yeah, it's 10 promised actions. And what's interesting is that I think all 10 are supposed to take place in the next year. So it's quite immediate, it's quite bold in some way to have such a breadth of actions. So these are everything from developing skills in literacy, so building public toolboxes. I'm smiling for a reason I will tell you afterwards. There's also initiatives to build partnerships and fostering innovation and interoperability. And the one that I was surprised to see but glad to see is they're going to promise to bring together experts across the member states in the EU, but then also try and support some of the global governance forums, such as the World Economic Forum. And also they're promising just to continue monitoring the metaverse, which to me says there will be another communication on this, possibly on a more sector-specific basis. And yeah, the reason I was smiling was because some of these things sound really good. That, you know, they're building toolboxes that the citizens can use to understand the metaverse. That sounds great, but if this is going to be just one page on an EU website that no lay EU citizen is ever going to see, then it's kind of for nothing.
And do you think they will do all that stuff they said in those 10 bullet points?
Yes, they absolutely will do. I think some of this is already being worked on. Especially there's an intellectual property toolbox that brands in the EU have been working for the last year with the European Union on this. So some of this is already ongoing work, especially the funding. Some of this funding was kind of already happening or in the works. So it's definitely going to happen. Again, once the machine gets moving, it doesn't stop. There might be some sort of delay to some of these action points, but they will come through.
Maybe let's go through those points a little bit more detailed. We don't have to elaborate too much into this, but I want to read them out here in the podcast so that people understand that what is actually going on and how useful that they might actually be. So there are 3 groups: skills, business, and governance. Everybody has 3 or 4 bullet points. So skills I find very interesting because it sounds like education actually, which I'm a big fan. It's not only giving regulations, but also educate the people who should understand what is going on, because it's a democracy. So why do they do that?
Well, it's not just to, on the one hand, it's to give the EU an opportunity to have, you know, a big say on a business level, to have some big companies and successful companies, if you have the skills required for it. But skills is also meant a bit more broadly. It's meant to be an inclusive thing. It's meant to be, you know, you don't leave behind the elderly, or you don't leave children unprepared for new virtual spaces. It's also like an education thing, as you say.
And it's, of course, a part of the Digital Decade policy program. maybe not everybody has heard about it. Maybe you can explain it in 1 or 2
Yeah,
sentences.
sure. This is. It will take. You say 1 or 2 seconds. It will take longer. No, I'll try and be brief.
Sentences.
It's basically a grand vision of what the EU should look like by 2030. So this started in 2010, and they set some really concrete targets. So the most compelling one I think to share is they want 100% of the EU citizens have access to gigabyte infrastructure, gigabyte broadband. Like gigabyte speed, I mean. So they also have targets around AI and cloud computing, edge computing, and things like this. But it's basically, what do we want the world to look like in 2030 in the EU?
Yeah, and one important point is, of course, skills. And they mentioned the talent pool. So develop skills for virtual world technologies, promote the EU as an attractive destination for highly skilled specialists from outside the bloc. Principles, which is very interesting, promote guiding principles for virtual worlds put forward by the citizens panel. That's what you already mentioned before.
Yes, and these principles actually, maybe it's not a complete coincidence, aligned with a new set of principles that the EU came out with in January at the beginning of this year around all digital policy. These principles were applied to all digital policy hereafter.
And digital literacy, develop a toolbox for the public and resources for young people to provide guidance on trustworthy virtual worlds technologies. I guess digital literacy is so important, especially with new technology, not only for young people, but especially.
It's really important, and it's not really talked about enough. Often when we talk about children online, we talk about making a super safe environment for them. But this is not actually the way to protect children's rights. For me, I find it quite patronizing, actually. If you speak to children, they're often much more aware of the dangers and safety and the kind of risks they have online. I think we need to find ways to empower children, not necessarily curb their enthusiasm. And also, it will be children. This is maybe one of the unique features of Web 4.0 is it will be children who are creating so much of this content, which is quite exciting. But obviously, then it's so important that we give them the tools to navigate it. I would just say on literacy. So I saw this amazing document on the EU website one day where they created like a 3-page pamphlet on what this regulation means for children. It's like a children-friendly way of understanding it. Mm-hmm. And it was great. I thought it was awesome, but I found it by complete accident. I'd never heard about it before. And I just fear that with all of these promises to promote literacy, what is it actually going to look like? Does it look like we give the national governments, so we give Germany like a set of tools that they can put into the education system? Does it look like advertising campaigns? It's so important, because if it's just one hidden page somewhere, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, business, partnerships, innovation, interoperability. I guess partnerships and innovation is pretty clear. Of course, there's a lot of money involved with that.
Would your listeners be familiar with the regulatory sandboxes, the idea of these?
No.
I think Germany actually has some of the most successful examples of these, but they want to experiment with sandboxes for virtual worlds. Sandboxes are basically an opportunity for startup typically, but can be small and medium-sized companies, to enter a period of supervision where they can experiment with new ideas. So I think the examples from Germany that I used to read about is, you have a self-driving car. It's not technically allowed on the road, but they'll monitor it, and so you can encourage them to experiment in real-world scenarios. So that's just what they are. They're quite an interesting concept, again, if they're done right.
Cool. So they are in some kind of sandbox, of course, but some kind of lab environment in some way.
Yes, precisely.
Which helps developing the technology. They are monitored precisely. So when something happens, you can stop it before rolling it out to the mass.
Yeah, and if it's done right, then the regulators learn about the technology. The people who are building it have a lesson, but they also have a chance to experiment. So it can be a win for all.
Yeah. And of course, interoperability, support the development of standards for open and interoperable virtual worlds, and support the open source community. They had to put it somewhere, so they put it to the interoperability, yeah. I think.
Yeah, it's also just, it's a bit like the reference to IP. It's very much one line. I think they sort of had to put it in, and it's not a big strategy or anything like this. It's just a commitment to interoperability. Interoperability has become the buzzword of digital policy in the EU. I don't know if you're aware that all the charges in the EU are going to have this UBC report, and that's actually a huge win, I think. But it's really confusing with virtual worlds. What do we actually want? Do we want people from Accenture's virtual office to be able to go to a Roblox game? I mean, I personally don't think that's the level we want. I think we want something like crossplay. That's kind of my feeling, but I'd be interested to hear what you think about it.
I think this is more, in my opinion, about stuff like communication, which already is taking place. Like you should be able to use WhatsApp and be able to talk to somebody who's using an Apple device, not using WhatsApp, or charging stuff. Yeah, you mentioned it with cars. Of course, charging phones, tablets, computers, stuff like that. They should all have just one cable.
Having one cable is going to be fantastic. It's also amazing, 15 years of innovation got us down to a cable this big, and it has these speeds and whatever. I mean, who knows where it could be in 5? Maybe we're all going to go wireless, but I don't know enough about the standards. I know that there are standards bodies that are observing it to see if there's a new sort of technology that we can adopt. But I hope that is the case, because I'd hate to think that we suddenly stop when we get to a certain point.
There's already the next iteration of USB-C around the corner. They won't stop with that. But of course, the biggest argument against something like that is that it stops innovation. But actually, it's the other way around. So what Apple is doing is just earning more money with that without being that much more innovative. They are also innovative, but by accident. It's not like it has to do something with it. What I really love is what they did, for example, with the energy regulation of monitors. So they stopped exemption from 8K monitors being able to use a lot of energy.
I saw this, yeah.
And what did it do? It sparked more innovation, because then they had to think about how to make 8K monitors better. And this is something I see with almost every clever regulation out there. And one big argument for me is also the consumption of material. That's not the good English word for it. Like saving the environment. We do not want to have so many different charging plugs and stuff like that and cables. That's just the most important argument for me. And for that, I would even slow down the innovation a little bit. I have no problem with that at all. We really have some problems, some sustainability problems, and I don't care about innovation. We can be as innovative as we want when the world dies or our world dies. That's just bullshit, we don't need that. So this is the biggest argument for me, but So
no, I think that's an important point to make.
So interoperability helps with environment, but also, of course, helps the consumer to actually be able to use devices longer, not being forced buying new devices and stuff like that. Okay, last point, governance.
Yeah, I think they don't fit perfectly under governance. One point here is they want to support public flagships. So this is kind of like case studies for smart and sustainable cities, and this is kind of already happening in the EU. And you might ask, why is that relevant for virtual worlds? Well, increasingly something like a digital twin is falling under this definition of virtual worlds. So there are some cities that are sort of working together to on this, and also virtual public services is another area that they want to invest in under this smart cities umbrella. The second point is an expert group. So they want to gather the 27 member states from the EU and discuss some of these topics with them. The reason I'm hesitating a little bit is because we actually have an entire institution that does that. It's called the Council. So how will it differ from the Council's work? I'm not sure. But anyway, it would be good to start talking with the national governments on this. The ninth one is they want to support existing global governance initiatives. So there are things like the Metaverse Standards Forum, or these international organizations that try to talk through some of these issues, especially things like interoperability. Interestingly, as well as just supporting these, I think the document also says it would support the development of a new organization, one that focuses more on the technical side of things than maybe the social elements. And then finally, under this governance title, monitoring. So I think at the moment they're just keeping their eyes open for new and emerging risks. One of the surprises with this document is that you kind of had the impression that there weren't any risks really. You never really got to, they didn't say explicitly, these are the gaps that are emerging. So monitoring, what they mean by this is that they're just going to keep their eyes open and probably have future initiatives.
Yeah. So what do we make out of that communication at the end? What do you think? Is that a good one?
I don't know if there are many good communications. So as part of this research, I was looking through the initial ones for AI, and some of the initial AI ones were kind of equally as fluffy or sort of, they don't seem like they're that important. And then look what they turned out to be. So I'm just glad that we're having conversations about these technologies super early. It's going to seem too early to most people. I think especially lay citizens might be confused that regulators are talking about this, but there was a sense in the EU that tech regulation came a bit too late in some cases. And so I think it's really important to start thinking about these issues early. And if the communication is the first example of that, then I'm delighted it's here.
What do we have to expect in the next couple of months and years after this communication? We saw it with the AI stuff that there might be stuff following up.
Yeah, you'll have a few more reports from the EU, from the Parliament side, before the end of the year, or one might be just in January. And then, so we have a 5-year terms in the EU, and now the next one is coming in 2024. So there'll be a new mandate. So you could have somebody from the EU that has a completely different idea on this. Maybe they want to call it spatial computing or something. I don't know, but there could. So we're kind of waiting to see what the next mandate is going to be interested in. But it's going to be tech. It's going to be green, sustainability. And we're expecting this initiative to spill over. So there will be in the next year an announcement of another initiative, and then maybe in 3 to 5 years. I don't think we're going to have a Virtual Worlds Act or a Metaverse Act. I think it's possible though that we will have this will start infiltrating in existing regulations. And whenever a new regulation is coming up about, I don't know, a city governance, we're going to talk about how is that relevant for virtual worlds? Or you could have a super sector specific regulation, I don't know, on culture, on creativity or something like this. That's what we're going to see, I think, in 3 to 5 years.
So not so much an own regulation, but this might be the work where it flows. Parts of it will appear in other regulations because they are already there.
Yeah, and you're already seeing this. You're already seeing in the digital decade targets references to the kind of technologies we might want to build. So it will just be the case that we have this term harmonization, and it's just you want all the regulations to make sense together. So they'll start referencing previous work on virtual worlds. And what's interesting for companies and also for to be honest with you, Thomas, there's a desperate lack of NGOs in this space at the moment in Brussels. Mm-hmm. But for companies at the moment, they're already setting definitions, they're already scoping out what is a virtual world. So it's kind of important to be involved in that conversation, I think, even at this very early stage.
What's up next for you personally and for Metaverse EU?
Well, we keep ramping up really at the moment. We're planning a few events in September, October. We want to really, I want the website to be even more useful than I hope it already is. There's so much potential there. When you start digging into what's going on in the EU, just pleasantly surprised to see so much going on. So I can't wait to be tracking it.
Yeah. Well, I was enjoying your website very much, and especially this article because it was very clear. And if you, dear listeners, want to read the article by Patrick by yourself, please check out the show notes. The article is highly recommended. And I'm really looking forward for what's next coming from you, Patrick. If people want to reach out to you, how should they do that?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for the kudos on the article and the very kind words. So Patrick Grady _ would be my Twitter. I'm becoming more active on this, and I also have LinkedIn too. So those are the best 2 shouts.
There is no Twitter anymore, as you know.
Oh, you put me in a hole here. Of course, on X.
Maybe also check out Mastodon because it's not that complicated, and a lot of people are actually joining there.
See, Thomas, I have Blue Sky. and I'm kind of enjoying it. So
Blue Sky is cool, but there are no invitation codes available.
Well, you might see one in your inbox after this. Let's see.
Nice. All right, Patrick, thank you very much for joining, and looking forward for what's next coming.
Thank you. A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that was episode 44 of Spatial Realities. Thanks again to Patrick for the interview. If you like this podcast, I would be happy if you would recommend it to others. Feel free to share the episode on social media, send them to colleagues and friends, and give me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'd also like to point you to our Discord server. You can find a link to it in the show notes or on spatialrealities.de. My name is Thomas Riedel, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Dieser Podcast ist eine Droidboy-Produktion.